So, are you ready? No? In a way, maybe we're never ready, but we're always ready. Let's get ready. Are you ready at least to clap and welcome the next panel to the stage? Yeah, you can do that. Okay, please welcome to the stage Mars Lord, Sally Derby, Rebecca Schiller, Dr. Rebecca Moore, Evelyn Callahan, and Dr. Clarke. Right. Hello, welcome. I'm going to spread these out. There we go. In fact, I might let a technician do that rather than... Know your skills. Welcome. Welcome.
Hello. Just going to do the whole grab some water and pretend we're not absolutely shitting it before we speak to you. Because as you can see, we're all consummate professionals up here. Another cup. Thank you. That's right. Enjoying your day so far? I went and had a lovely Korean lunch before I came. So I'm feeling great. Pass that along. Okay, so welcome. This panel is about the politics of birth and making motherhood diverse. Two sets of glasses, seeing glasses, reading glasses. Don't look at, but yes, 52, well, in a minute. That was the right response, thank you. Fabulous, I'm gonna love you all. Okay, so why don't we start with some introductions? My name is Mars, like the planet Lord. Not like the chocolate, fiery, passionate Mars Lord. And we have here Rebecca Schiller. You really all ought to introduce yourselves so they hear your voices.
I'm Rebecca Schiller. Do you want me to say the next bit too?
Yes. Who are you? What are you?
So I'm a mother. I founded a charity called Birthrights that's set up to protect women's human rights in pregnancy and childbirth. Mars has also looked after me when I had my babies, and I do some writing. I write about pregnancy and birth, particularly with a sort of women's rights, reproductive rights angle. Anything else?
No, that'll do for now.
Okay.
And who are you, lovely?
Hi, I'm Sally Derby. I run a network for disabled mothers called Mums Like Us.
Excellent. And the woman wearing the skirt I almost wore today?
Then I would have been like half naked. That would have been awkward.
It's true.
I'm Ria. I'm an obstetrician and gynecologist in training. You can find me on Instagram at the Dr. Mummy. See what I did there? Where I will be ranting about healthcare inequalities and parenting the car park at Audi, which is horrendous.
And gorgeously at the end.
Hi, I'm Evelyn Callahan, and I'm a trans health researcher, and I'm also trans and non-binary myself, so that's the perspective I'm bringing you today.
Excellent. So, there you go. We've got a little bit of an interesting panel. So let's start with you then, as you're right beside me, Rebecca. You're founder of Birthrights, which is the human rights in childbirth charity. So many mums in birth don't feel like they have a lot of rights. So what do you think needs to happen for mothers to be able to feel like they can get their voices heard?
I think that question has a very complex answer, and I'm going to try to give a bit of it because I'm known for long-windedness. Try not to be long-winded. I think it's multi-layered. I mean, first there's a general level of low expectations when it comes to our rights as humans, as women. We don't get taught about what our rights are as part of our formal education, and that's something we have to seek out for ourselves. I think healthcare settings are settings in which people in general, perhaps in the maternity sector, it's even more pronounced. People feel that they do not necessarily have the same power as when they are in other settings. This sort of white coat syndrome, when you go to see your doctor and everything you had thought you would ask them at home and all your intelligent questions disappear entirely. But then I suppose also there's a lot of emotional muddying of the water around questions with pregnancy and birth. A lot of discussions, ideological discussions about the right, the best way, the healthiest way to give birth, mixed up with our identities as people who are becoming parents. And so the issue about what our rights might be in a pregnancy or a birth setting is often complicated by which motherhood tribe we've been told we should join. You know, you're a natural birth person or a epidural person, attachment parent person. And actually, of course, rights transcend all of that, and I would suggest are much, much more important and more interesting than that. But it's very easy to get distracted into those conversations. And I think also it's not necessarily a formal part of antenatal education. Antenatal education can vary wildly. Lots of women don't have access to antenatal education, but the antenatal education that exists is woefully lacking in many cases in an unbiased presentation of what your expectations should be as a person entering that setting, not as a combative, you can expect your rights to be taken away from you, but a welcome to this system in which you are valued as someone who retains exactly the same humanity as you did before you became pregnant. I think I should stop there, given the long-windedness.
Excellent. And so let's move across to you, Ria, Dr. Ria. Ria? Excellent. That's my middle daughter's name. It's one of my favourites. According to the most recent Embrace UK reports, Black women are 5 times more likely to die in the perinatal period. What do you think needs to happen in order to bring that number down and close the disparity rate? And when I say 5 times more likely to die in pregnancy, I mean 5 times more likely than white women, and Asian women we know are twice as likely to die than white women. So what do you think we need to do to bring that number down and close that disparity?
This is such a huge question, and I think I have more questions than answers.
Yeah.
We know that Black and Asian women are more likely to get conditions like gestational diabetes, which then can increase the risk of conditions during pregnancy and birth, which can contribute to bad outcomes. We know things like that. We know that Black and Asian women may be more likely to live in challenging social situations, for example. All of this can contribute to mortality figures. When you look at the reports, they talk about things like this. They quite rightly mention them. What they don't talk about are the African and Indian elephants in the room. Yeah. Which is why I'm here, I guess. And I think the thing that we don't talk about is racial bias or racism. And when we do that, we kind of have to dance around it because people get sensitive and we need to think about people's feelings. Well, actually, we need to think about the fact that Black women are 5 times more likely to die. And if that makes people feel uncomfortable when we talk about it and when we call out the fact that racism might play a part in that, then tough, you have to suck it up.
Yeah.
I've been part of forums and social media with healthcare professionals, and when this issue was raised, when we talked about the fact that Black women were 5 times more likely to die, and someone said, well, what about the racism in healthcare? What about racial bias? The conversation completely exploded, and as a result, the group got shut down. People were so sensitive about talking about the fact that racism and racial bias may be part of Black women's experiences, and I say may. For lots of Black women, it is part of their experience, and if we deny talking about that, then we're not really serious about tackling why this is happening. It's not the only reason that it happens. There are lots of reasons, but if we're not going to talk about that, then what's the point? So I think, as well as looking at the physiological, biological factors, the social issues, we need to look at as healthcare professionals, and I am complicit in that. I am also a healthcare professional. Being Black doesn't give me immunity from the fact that I may contribute to that, as awkward as that makes me feel. We need to talk about the fact that Black women may feel marginalised, that they may feel they're not taken seriously, that if the strong black woman narrative is applied to you when you tell someone that you're in pain, then it might make you less likely to disclose how you feel in the future. And if that has a bad outcome that affects you and your child and your family, then suddenly you become one of those figures. And I think if the figures were reversed, then a lot more people would be interested in it. As a black woman, as other black women here may feel, we can talk about this amongst ourselves until we're black in the face. We know the figures. We're not surprised by them. And when we talk to colleagues and they say, oh, isn't that terrible? I had no idea. Yeah, it's terrible. What are we doing about it? I have a certain amount of privilege, which is why I'm up on this stage talking about it. But I don't have as much power as, unfortunately, as one of my white colleagues talking about it. So if we're actually going to dismantle it and talk about it, it needs to be everybody doing it, not just me and not just my black colleagues.
And of course, that totally ties in really well with the work that you founded and were doing, Rebecca, which is about birthrights. And if the birthright isn't for all women, then whose birthright is it? You know, we have to look at those elephants in the room. We do need to confront implicit and explicit bias. Some of us have lived with it for so long that we no longer almost recognize it because it's just part of our standard living. And this isn't a time when we talk about birthrights and when we talk about the disparity in the maternal morbidity rates, this isn't the time for people to jump up and give their non-racist credentials. We're not actually interested in your non-racist credentials. Angela Davis, the activist, says it's not enough to be non-racist, you need to be anti-racist. And when you hear these studies and when you hear about these things happening, look at why you're responding the way you're responding, and then either get on up with helping or get out of the way so that we can stop women and their babies dying. And the Embrace study also shows us that black babies are twice as likely to die by the time they are 1 than white babies. So as we think, I think it's good that we started here with birthrights, and we'll come back to that. But now I'd quite like to move on to you, Sally. So you run a network for disabled mothers called Mums Like Us. So what do you think brand and business could be doing differently to ensure that disabled mums aren't an afterthought or a tick in the... I'm not keen on the word diversity, a tick in the inclusion box.
Yeah.
Because as I heard once, we're not the chips to the side of your burger, we're the seasoning inside of it, and that's what inclusion is compared to diversity. But tell me, what is it that we can be doing, brands and business, etc., can be doing to include you?
Well, Mums Like Us initially, I set it up as a community to... when I was first a mother, and for the first few years, I really did feel like the only disabled mother in the world. And so I was trying to enable disabled mothers to just talk to each other, and just that community. That's all it was to begin with. But recently, I've really started to think of it more as, or also as a way of trying to campaign to bring disabled mothers into the parenting mainstream. I feel like very often disabled mothers are excluded, or feel certainly excluded from that space. And so increasingly I'm trying to campaign for that. And I think that if we think about disability in the broader sense, not just somebody who's got a physical disability that you can see, but anybody with a debilitating mental health condition or a learning difficulty or an invisible disability, chronic pain, etc., the list is endless. Very few of us end up actually fitting into the supposed norm. And so we need to try and allow, if we think the social model of disability, as opposed to the medical model of disability, says that it's not my failings, it's not the failings of the disabled person that disables them, it's the failings of the world around us to include us. And so brands, corporations, organisations, you know, from a church hall to the biggest high street retailer, for example, all of these organisations have a responsibility to be more inclusive. And I think in the question you said about tick boxing and afterthoughts and things like that, that kind of thing comes across when organisations do one little thing. So if they put one disabled model in one advertising campaign, tick, well, no, it doesn't work like that. It needs to be so embedded into their ethos, and that will make disabled mothers feel like part of the mainstream. That, I don't think, is going to happen while there aren't disabled people at the top of these organisations. And so while we've got organisations that are run by a very specific set of humans, those people aren't going to see the disabled mother who can't put her baby into her car seat because she can't reach from her wheelchair to clip it in, or can't get her baby into the cot. And disabled mothers are crowdfunding these very basic needs that we've all used because they're not available on the high street. So there need to be disabled mothers at the top of those organisations so that those organisations see the things that they need, and then they'll be brought into the mainstream. And that's in hospitals and schools and shops and across the board.
And what more can we do? Because the problem with asking about what the brands and the corporations can do is that's what they're doing up there in the macro. But in the micro, what can we be doing, those of us within the birth world? So, for example, I'm so passionate about seeing black birth as normal that I'm looking to colour in the landscape of birth, and I'm talking about it everywhere. I'm doing it everywhere, and I'm encouraging people. I mean, Rebecca and I are old friends, so I know that if I call Rebecca up and go, for God's sake, there is nothing in that magazine that you are talking in that says this. And then she'll start to do something. So what can I do? What can we do to sort of help? Because we need to stand together. Or we need to be together.
Absolutely. And I think it is just, a lot of it is just general perception. So being allies to disabled people, you know, and being non-judgmental and being respectful and not imposing yourself upon a disabled mother, but offering help if you feel like she needs it. But it's also an acceptance thing, and it's a visibility thing. The more that disabled people are represented, and the more that disabled mothers are represented, the more that the general public will accept that disabled mothers are there and that they're doing it. Because, like I said, I felt like the only disabled mother in the world. And it wasn't until I started Mums Like Us and saw that there are hundreds of disabled mothers doing a perfectly good job in challenging circumstances and having to constantly think 2 steps ahead. So nothing's marketed at us, you know. So if we want something, a lot of disabled mothers use products that are made for parents of multiples because they're designed for people to be able to use hands-free or one-handed. But they're not designed, they're not marketed at us. So people are having to do all this extra work to find the information that they need. So I think just it is a general thing. That we need more visibility. We need people not... I'm sorry, I'm rabbling. I'm going on and on. So this last thing. There was an article in The Guardian recently that was how to prepare to be a disabled mother. And the first line was, prepare to feel like a novelty. And this is what I see over and over again from disabled women in the group, is that they've said that they're pregnant, and their doctor has looked shocked. You're pregnant? How can that be the normal way? Like, disabled people have sex, and it shocks people. But, you know, I think that even that barrier needs to be broken so that people aren't surprised by the very beginnings of it all.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. So, Evelyn, as our resident expert in trans healthcare, can you explain some of the difficulties that trans people face when seeking healthcare and in this mad birth world of ours?
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, it's the perfect segue from what Sally was just bringing up, which in the very first instance, the lack of visibility that we exist, and specifically within the pregnancy and birth world. So it's still, you know, I don't want to make this sound like something of the past, because certainly in many parts of the world, people are still, trans folks are still required to be sterilized, and but here that sort of that idea is still runs really deep, that of course, if you're trans, you won't want to reproduce.
Yeah.
That it's a requirement of your transness that you hate every part of your body, that you never want to use it, that that these things that are considered traditionally feminine, of course, why would you want to participate that? And which has already been brought up several times today. It's kind of the companion piece to so many amazing women that are doing work around choosing not to give birth, that doesn't make them less of a woman, that pregnancy and even just raising children at all is not a requirement of your womanhood or your femininity. Kind of on the other side of that those things are not inherently feminine or limited to women. And so, lots of people, there's endless ways that could look for different trans folks, but just in the first instance, that recognition, so when talking about healthcare with healthcare professionals, educating them that, this is something that, you might have some men and some non-binary people coming to you looking for fertility-related healthcare, trying to get help to get pregnant, to use surrogate, whatever that looks like for those folks, and kind of breaking past that those assumptions that's not something that we would want. Yeah. And then dealing with those, like we're all talking about up here, those biases, those judgments that lead to poor health outcomes in general, which for these different marginalized communities, we kind of share that struggle. Obviously, it looks different for each group, but yeah.
Yeah, we're learning more and more, aren't we, that none of us fit quite into the box that is the generic parent with the generic baby doing the generic things that we're supposed to all do. So, Rebecca, I'll come back to you. Although there are various options to choose from when it comes to how women give birth, why do you feel that women are still pitted against one another when it comes to making these decisions?
Well, it's the patriarchy, isn't it? It's not an accident that every time the media covers anything to do with birth and parenting and feeding, what happens is there are two apparently completely different people on the opposite side of this, cavernous divide, who are going to argue that their way is the right way and that the other way is the wrong way. And that's the way that women have been encouraged to talk about their experiences, and that's surely deliberate. And it's a really effective way of distracting us from making great progress. And I think as the panel's so neatly illustrated so far, and it's been the biggest thing that I've learned so far in, the 8 years I've been doing this work, is that there isn't any kind of normal, there isn't any kind of standard experience, that some people definitely have it a lot easier than others, and some people have a really, really, really difficult time being listened to. But the trick is about listening to the people who are having the experience and who are inhabiting their bodies. The system isn't very friendly to individuality, though maternity policy is making progress in that direction. But I think it's also, as well as being on policymakers and healthcare professionals working in the system, to accept that they need to treat every person that comes before them as an individual with a different set of needs, but a very similar set of basic human desires. That's why I like the human rights framework, because it talks about dignity, choice, respectful care, and autonomy. If you can get that right, then you get a lot right. But I think it's also on us. I'm still learning, and I'm far from there yet, but that I have to use my privilege in a way that lifts up other people, and that, for example, so maternity voice partnerships, most areas have a maternity voice partnership, which is how service users can feed back about maternity services. and we're talking about things we can do. One of them is to be part of those, but to be part of those, making sure that we're finding ways to include women who aren't traditionally part of those groups. So there absolutely have to be disabled women as part of the MVPs. There absolutely have to be black and minority ethnic women. There have to be trans people contributing to these conversations, because otherwise those issues aren't going to be raised. And actually the other thing is that we have to be paying these women, these people, for their time. You can't expect individuals to continue to make services better just on the strength of volunteering. And that's what I see a lot of women and a lot of activists, a lot of individuals working very, very hard to change the world, and they've at their own expense, at the expense of their time, at the expense of their mental health, and the expense of their pockets. And I think to stop women being pitted against one another, to stop the slow progress on the various competing and needs, we have to ensure that people on the ground who are contributing to the change are actually being paid for their work, because that's the only way that the people who need to be at the forefront of that are going to be able to do that. Just needed to get that one off my chest.
That's all right, as someone who's constantly asked to do things for free. Thank you so much. So, Rhea, you're an OBGYN, so that will make you happy, Evelyn, because that's a nice American term. The doctor who's a mother to a young child. Have you personally felt the sting of the cuts in the maternity services? Quite severe cuts, it would seem. Or, well, it is. And if so, why do you keep showing up?
Well, that Aldi special by aisle is quite appealing. So two separate questions there. Have I felt the cuts as a mother? Yes, when I was pregnant, having to sit and then lie on the floor of a hospital waiting for a bed because there are no beds, and waiting for 12 hours. And that is with the privilege of being a doctor and people knowing that I was a doctor. That's difficult, it's horrible. It's as much as I'm a doctor, I'm also a person too. I'm a patient. I have family who are patients, and it's awful watching the system feel like it's imploding and seeing the impact that has on patients, on staff, for example. And why do I keep showing up? That's a really good question. It's something I ask myself all the time. As teenagers who decide that you want to be a doctor, or if you're really precocious and 4 like I was, you get conditioned that if you want to be a doctor, you have to be this all-singing, all-dancing person who does loads of extracurricular stuff and is also really good at it. You can't just play the trumpet for fun like I did. I was shit. You have to be amazing, and you can't just do sport. You have to do champion, cross-county, all sorts of stuff. And then you do all this stuff and you get into medical school and you start being a doctor where it feels like you don't have a life. You don't have any time to have any extracurricular hobbies. All this stuff that you've been told you have to do to support other people, it feels like the system isn't doing for you. Yet you're constantly meant to have compassion for people and always be understanding when nobody has any compassion for you. The NHS is a fantastic, amazing thing, and it's filled with wonderful people who work really hard. But a bit like what you were saying about MVPs, the NHS runs on goodwill. It works because people do more and more for less and less. And I am a stoical advocate for the NHS. I couldn't imagine working in privatised healthcare. But there are days when if someone said to me, you could do the same job you do now in private healthcare, and there would be enough staff, and you could leave on time. And if you made a mistake because you were exhausted, we wouldn't come after you and threaten you with being incarcerated for manslaughter. Would I take it? I would seriously consider it. So I turn up for work because I love my job. I'm really lucky. It's a privilege to be involved in women's lives at the best and the worst times, and unfortunately sometimes it is the worst time of their lives.
Yeah.
And it's especially a privilege then. And I feel really lucky. I still get excited every time I meet people that are having a family, every time I meet women that are empowered to make decisions about healthcare, and that's why I do it. I don't always want to, I don't always like it. And people say, well, it's a vocation, you knew what it was going to be like before you went into it. Did I, when I was a teenager, did I really understand it? And does that mean that because I went into it as a vocation, that I must martyr myself until I snap because I knew what I was doing? I have friends that have left, and I don't blame them for leaving. I would support anybody that feels that they've had enough, because your life is more important than the NHS. As amazing as the NHS is, as much of a vocation as it is, you matter, you are more important than the system, and no one person should feel like they have to prop up a system that is underfunded, with demoralised staff, with politicians who say the right words but don't really back it up with anything. But I love my job.
So Sally, I hear you wrote an incredible list, the mother of all lists for Clemmie Telford, which was really eye-opening to lots of people because of the way you listed the day-to-day struggles of being a disabled mother. So I know we started to touch on it in the first question, but what could people do to support a less abled mother if they saw her out and about without overstepping their boundaries and, making her feel patronised, for example?
Yeah, you see, that's the tricky one, is the feeling patronised. And I think people are understandably concerned about that, and people don't want to overstep the mark, and that's right. And I think it's about trying to make people feel, I think I've kind of already said this, so I won't go on, but not too judged and not patronised. And I can think of an example when I have stood on train platforms and had to ask people to help me because no one has offered. And I've thought, well, why didn't anyone offer? But then I can think of other times when I've been trying to get up, one specific time when I was trying to get up some steps with the pushchair, and someone came in front of me and picked up the front of the pushchair, but he didn't tell me he was going to, and my balance is all off, so I just flew. I went flying to the ground, the pushchair on top of me, and then I wildly apologised to this man for my own lack of balance, whereas actually, if he'd have just said, can I help you? And I'd have said, oh yeah, can you help me in this specific way? Then that would have worked. And that I know is what he was intending. But by just coming and helping me without offering his help or explaining what he was doing, it was actually really counterproductive. So I think offering help but not pushing help upon people, asking people if they require your help. Sometimes we all need a bit of help, right? Parenting is hard, and I think we all appreciate just a random act of kindness. If someone just helps you out, it's always nice, isn't it? But if someone's getting about their day and they're absolutely fine, you wouldn't just go up to them and start helping them. And it's when people do that to you that you know that it's because you're disabled, and that can feel a bit hurtful. And I think as well, obviously I can only speak for myself, I can't speak for all disabled mothers, but I think I personally would sometimes I'm quite proud, and I would sometimes put myself, not at serious risk, but I would push myself to do something because I want to do it myself. Yeah. But I would never put my children at risk. And so I think other people need to understand that. If I need help because it is for the safety of my children, I will ask for it. And I don't like the feeling that I sometimes get, and it's largely probably because it reminds me of my own insecurities, but I don't like it when I feel like people are trying to protect my children as if I'm not protecting my children myself. And I think that that's a risk as well. So I think sometimes the silent, unspoken things that people do to give you a hand. I'm really partially sighted, and there's a big notice board outside my kids' school that says things that are happening the next day. And you don't want to be the parent that sends the kid in school uniform on the mufti day. That's like every parent's worst nightmare. And the teacher always comes out and tells me if there's something I need to know, because she knows that I can't read the notice board. And it's just like those kind of silent things that are really supportive without making you feel patronised or without making you feel like you're not doing it yourself.
Yeah.
Everyone wants to do it themselves when they can, I think, in general.
Unless you can get someone to regularly pour a glass of red, but that might just be me. So, Evelyn, language. What adjustments need to be made to both language and services to ensure that trans people and non-binary people feel supported should they choose to give birth?
Yeah, so that's sort of the maybe the easiest and also the hardest thing, because it seems really simple. It's a one-for-one switch, but it's something that is so ingrained. The like inherent femininity of pregnancy and childbirth is something that is really taken for granted, and is so ingrained in all of us, myself included. I wasn't raised in some sort of post-gender utopia. I was raised in this, not the same place. I don't know if anyone else here is from rural Connecticut, but that would be a strange coincidence. But, with the same sort of socialization around these things. So the first step is what I always ask people to think about when we're working through these things is, what do you mean? Because people can it's very intimidating, like being like, you have to change the way that you're talking about and thinking about things is like, and I don't want to do something wrong. Like the very lovely organizer of this panel said that to me, bless, when I came. It's like, I don't want to say the wrong thing. And it's like, it's okay. You probably will, and that's fine. And so really thinking about taking a step back, what do I actually mean? Who am I actually talking about in this blurb that I'm writing, right? Am I talking about mothers? That's one group of people. That includes, so if you want to talk about all mothers, then you want to think about, am I using language about, am I excluding not just from a gender point of view, but am I using language around femininity? Because, I'm also trying to encourage people to think about is including butch women, including, queer women in our discussions about motherhood. Am I including non-birth mothers? Am I including adopted mothers? Partners of birth parent, the women partners of birth parents, so that may include trans women as well. So, who am I actually talking about? Mm-hmm. If it's birth parents that you're talking about, those aren't all going to be mothers. So there's it's like a Venn diagram, but there's some people that are mothers that aren't birth parents, and there's some people that are birth parents that aren't. This was a really weird visual to do.
We're just assuming it's American.
Well, yes, it's cultural differences. So really thinking about, are you using she, her pronouns to refer to this group of people? Are you asking your patients their pronouns? When they tell you, because trust me, we know you're not going to ask us, so we pro-offer that information. It would be great if you did, but it's never happened to me. So we pro-offer that information. Are you putting it in their notes? And then are people actually reading those notes and taking heed of that? When you're if you're giving information about abortion services, childbirth, postnatal care and postnatal support, are those, is that material, who are you talking about? What do you mean? Are you including everyone who you're talking about in the language that you're using? And, things like the support groups, like NC2 groups and things like that. Is everyone going into that space, so if we're talking more about services now, is everyone coming into that space going to feel welcome there? So are trans and queer birth parents going to feel like this is a place where I can also go and get support, or are they going to be confronted with like lots of pink flowery imagery and like language that's she, her, mom, mother, and be like, oh, this isn't a place for me. And where are those people going to be getting support? So, yeah.
So I'm not quite sure how long we have, but I'm just going to ignore everybody and just keep going. Hey, this is my moment in the sun.
3 minutes, she said.
2 or 3 minutes?
3 minutes, yeah.
2 or 3?
Take 3.
I'm Jamaican, so that's about 15. Well, that's not a thing. So perhaps what we might do is ask if people have a couple of questions, because I can see a very keen hand down there, just checking up in the cheap seats, no hands there. So
I have this sort of, and it's not a fully formed thought, but this troubling niggle about maternity voices partnerships. And there's a shorthand in my head that kind of goes, mums chatting. Like, do we use these kind of groups for things that are across all genders, that are illnesses, that are serious things? Or is it something that we pull out around birth? Because there's something that's slightly, I feel, patronising about it, but that might be unfair, but every time I hear it, I just slightly get this, ugh. And I know they do great work, I'm not diminishing that. It's just a sort of, there's something about the phrasing of it and all of it that just makes me uncomfortable.
The thing that makes me uncomfortable about it is that it can be used as a tick box. So if you have the mums talking group, well, we do that. We do listening to women here. We do it once every 6 months. We listen to women, and then we shred the minutes. I think generally across healthcare there is much more interest in co-production and co-design. It's translating that into genuine involvement. There are some really innovative MVPs, like one in Reading, that Lisa Ramsey, who came into this sort of work through being a doula and now works for NHS England. They are coming onto the wards, they are walking the patch, they're meeting people on the postnatal wards, they're taking first-hand information straight back, feeding that back into the midwifery and the obstetric teams, and they're being paid to do it. And there's some, I think if you can make those services, and you don't just need it in birth, you need it, I'm sure, across healthcare, perhaps in reproductive healthcare more than other areas, because we're not very good at listening to the people in those services, perhaps more than others. But I think it's about, if it is a tick box, then it's probably worse than not having anything. If it's a genuine way of involving the people who are participating in the services, in designing them and improving them, then it's a good thing. But that requires some funds. So.
And I mean, I take your point about wondering about whether it's sort of patronising, but actually, sometimes what we need to do is we need to look around the room and we see that there are different needs for different people. What we constantly do is shrink into our own particular need. But maybe what we need to do, or start doing more, is looking around the room, seeing who is in the most need at that time, and raising them up. And once they've risen up, we look around the room again and we say, who now is in most need? Because the danger is that we say, well, that just seems like it's that, so I'm not going to fully engage. And this is not a personal thing, this is a thought I've had for a long time. But how do we make sure that everyone is raised up? But sometimes we have to just do it, you first, and then you by looking at the need. So there's a question over there.
Yeah, hi. I felt quite empowered when I gave birth. I've had 2 now, by my dad. And my dad said to me, whatever is happening, I want you to listen to your instinct, and I want you to trust it. At both births, I felt like I wasn't being listened to, and actually, because they were the midwife or they were the consultant, that they knew best, I wonder if you feel the same, that maybe we've got an element of over-academicising childbirth, and maybe we should hark back to let's listen to our bodies and let's empower women to listen to their bodies, and maybe we won't have so many problems, especially with episiotomies. My friends especially feel like they've just been torn because the midwife knew best. Thanks.
So I think we've probably time for one very last, very quick question, because apparently my Jamaican timing isn't doing it for anyone. So does anyone have a question for this side of me, the panel? Because those two questions have and comments have gone mostly there. You had your hand up fastest and first, I'm sorry.
I'm 12 weeks pregnant, and I've
Congratulations.
Thank you. It's my second, but I've got a blood clot in my lung. And obviously, when I was discharged for that blood clot, they said, you can't go on any contraception, possibly for life, but don't get pregnant.
Okay, useful.
So I was like, okay. Obviously, I got pregnant quite soon after that. Went back to hospital, and I was advised to abort, which I don't know if that's just a doctor thinking of my best health, but I chose not to. I haven't had anything further from them. In your professional opinion, am I going to be safe to continue on?
This is so difficult to answer because I don't know you, I don't know your case. I can't give you professional medical advice because it would be really inappropriate. You deserve good care. And that means it's really hard to advocate for yourself in a situation where you already feel like you're on the back foot. But you have the right to go back and ask for an explanation, to ask someone to sit down and talk you through the decision making and what happens next, and for you to express your concerns about what's going to happen, because it's your body. But it would be so wrong of me to try and advise you over an interface like this when I don't know anything about you.
So, sadly, I don't think they're going to let me squeak in even one more question. I personally have about 112 to ask. It would be lovely if we had an opportunity to I feel like each of these incredible women and people have shared a tiny, tiny little nugget as to the complex and myriad perinatal period, and it would be and postnatal period, and life really, it would be so good to almost have, a panel that's just here about childbirth and birth rights, a panel here, because I would love to know more about your work, and that means a bit of reading and Googling for me, and a little, glass of wine, whilst you talk about it, and also with you, Evelyn. Obviously, the Brace stuff and the race stuff is close to my heart. But I'd like to thank you all for listening, and I think what I'd like to do is challenge you to look around and say, okay, where is that greatest need that might not particularly benefit just me? And what can I do to help there? Each person here has shared a little bit of what they do, and I'm sure that each of us can take one small action in relation to each of these issues to actually see the change we want to see in this birth world, because we shouldn't have mothers dying unnecessarily in childbirth and in the perinatal period, whatever their race. We shouldn't have the erasure and invisibility of disabled and other abled parents. And it's time we found out that it's not just me. There are non-binary people, there are trans people who deserve the same respect and rights as I do. And learning to change your language, yes, it's a bit difficult. I'm about to be 52 and I'm always going to forget to use the right pronouns. But, well, maybe not always, but I am going to try. So think of your one action for each thing. And I can't wait to see you somewhere and hear the things that have changed in your life because of a day like today, Pregnant Then Screwed. Thank you for your time.